Welcome to the Horror Hive channel, where the darkness and unknown come alive. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an episode of terror. Let's dive into the darkness together. The Secret Society's Revenge, a college horror story. College student Josh was thrilled when he received an invitation to join an ultra-secret society. The coded messages seemed like a fun challenge, and he couldn't wait to discover what lay in store for him. Little did he know that the messages were from the ghosts of past members, each of whom had met a gruesome end. As he progressed through the society's tests, they became more and more difficult and strange. He was forced to carry out punishing tasks on other pledges, such as stealing from local stores and vandalizing campus property. He started to question the morality of what he was doing, but he couldn't back out now. He had come too far. The final test was the most grueling of all. He was locked in an abandoned storage facility and forced to carry out increasingly violent tasks on his fellow pledges. The facility was dark and damp, and the only light came from flickering candles. He could hear the ghosts of the past members whispering and laughing all around him, urging him on. He couldn't escape their whispers and screams, and he knew that if he didn't complete the test, he would be next to join their ranks. The tasks he was forced to do were more and more brutal, like hurting each other and even killing. He was in a state of shock and horror. He didn't know how to react. The society was not what it seemed, and the true purpose of the society was to sacrifice new pledges to the spirits of the past members who met a gruesome end. He was left with the haunting realization that the society's revenge was more than just a game. He was trapped in a nightmare. He had to complete the tasks to survive, and survive he did, but not without the scars of this horror. He knew that the memory of this night will haunt him for the rest of his life. The spirits of the past members were becoming more aggressive and more violent as the night went on. He could feel their cold breath on his neck and hear their whispers in his ear. They seemed to be getting stronger and more determined to make him pay for the sins of past pledges. Josh was sure that they were trying to kill him. He was on the brink of insanity. He could feel the pressure of the spirits and the fear of the tasks he was being forced to do. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he managed to complete the final task and was able to escape the storage facility. But the experience left him with a deep sense of unease, and he knew that the society's true purpose was not what it seemed. The ghosts of the past members were still with him. He could feel their presence everywhere. He knew they were not done with him yet. He was left with the feeling that the society's revenge was not over yet. It was just the beginning. The Ghostly Relative, a haunting horror story. I had always been fascinated by my family's history, and I was particularly interested in a close relative who had died before I was born. I had heard stories about him my whole life, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of connection to him, even though we had never met. I had always been curious about him and wanted to know more about him. One day, as I was walking home from work, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the upstairs window of the house across the street, I saw the ghostly figure of my relative, staring back at me. I had no doubt it was him. He looked just like the pictures I had seen of him, and the resemblance was uncanny. I stood there, frozen, staring at him in shock and disbelief. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was trying to communicate something to me. I was both terrified and compelled to find out more. I worked up the courage to break into the neighbor's house, but as soon as I entered, I saw him again, this time in the window of my own house. I was frozen with fear. He seemed to be beckoning me to come closer, but I couldn't move. As I stood there, staring at the ghostly figure of my relative, I felt a sense of unease wash over me. I realized that he had been watching me my whole life, and that he had a message for me. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that I needed to find out. I followed the ghost through the house, but he seemed to disappear whenever I got too close. I searched every room but found nothing. I was on the brink of giving up when I heard a faint whispering coming from the attic. I climbed the stairs and opened the door, and there he was, standing in the corner, staring at me with a sad look in his eyes. He finally spoke. "I've been watching over you all these years. I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you and that I love you, but now it's time for me to move on. I have to let go." I was in shock. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there staring at him. He smiled at me and then he was gone. I never saw him again, but I knew that he was finally at peace and that he had fulfilled his purpose of watching over me. But the experience left me with a feeling of unease. I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was still watching me, even though he was gone. I started to notice strange occurrences in my house, like doors opening and closing on their own, and objects moving on their own. I couldn't sleep at night, as I kept hearing his voice whispering in my ear. I also started to have vivid nightmares, where I saw him standing in the corner of my room, staring at me with a blank expression. These nightmares became more frequent and more intense as time went on, and I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I tried to find out more about him and his death, but I couldn't find any information. It was like he never existed, and it made me even more paranoid and scared. I was convinced that he was still trying to tell me something, and I didn't know what it was. I eventually had to move out of my house, as the ghostly presence of my relative was too overwhelming for me to handle. I never found out what his message was, but I knew that he was still with me, and that I would never be able to escape his haunting presence. The ghostly relative was a horror story that I would never forget. The Telekinetic Terror, a police horror story. Sheriff Tom had seen his fair share of dangerous criminals, but none quite like the man he had locked up that night. The suspect, known for his violent tendencies and history of mental illness, had been caught after a high-speed chase and was being held in the local police station. Tom had heard rumors about the man's supposed telekinetic abilities but had dismissed them as just another symptom of his mental illness. As the night shift began, the sheriff and his deputies began to notice strange occurrences happening in the station. Objects would move on their own, and doors would open and close without explanation. They shrugged it off as strange, but harmless, occurrences. But as the night went on, things began to take a terrifying turn. The man they had locked up in the holding cell began to use his telekinetic powers to booby-trap the station. Suddenly, the lights went out, and the sheriff heard a loud crash, followed by the screams of his deputies. He quickly realized that the suspect had used his powers to make objects in the station fly towards them at high speeds, killing his deputies in the process. The sheriff was trapped in the station with a dangerous and powerful criminal, who had used his telekinetic powers to turn the station into a death trap. He was forced to use all of his training and instincts to evade the suspect and find a way out of the station. As he made his way through the station, he saw the destruction caused by the suspect's powers. Offices were destroyed, walls were smashed, and blood was everywhere. The suspect was using his powers to make objects fly at him, and he had to dodge them to survive. He could hear the suspect's maniacal laughter echoing through the station, taunting him. He knew that he was the only one left alive, and that the suspect was coming for him next. The sheriff's mind was in a state of panic and fear. He didn't know what to expect next. He knew that the suspect had complete control over the station and that he was playing a deadly game with him. The sheriff could feel the suspect's telekinetic powers manipulating the environment around him, making it harder and harder for him to escape. He heard objects crashing and breaking as they were being hurled at him. He felt the walls closing in on him, and the floor shifting beneath him. He knew that he was in a battle for survival, and that every move he made could be his last. As he made his way through the station, he came across the bodies of his fallen deputies, and he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of guilt and remorse. He knew that it was his responsibility to protect them, and he had failed them. He knew that he had to keep moving, and that he couldn't let their deaths be in vain. Finally, he reached the exit, but the suspect was right behind him. In a final struggle, the sheriff managed to subdue him, but not before the suspect killed himself with his telekinesis. Sheriff Tom was the only survivor of the telekinetic terror that had occurred that night. He was left with physical and emotional scars from the incident, and the memory of that night would haunt him forever. The experience had left him with a deep understanding of the dangers of the unknown and the importance of being prepared for the unexpected. We hope you enjoyed our journey into the world of horror. We strive to bring you the best in horror entertainment, and we appreciate your support. Remember to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of terror. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in our next story.